Hey, welcome back to Escape Pod. So last time we took a look at the background that we're doing for episode 1 of Boxers and Briefs. I did this quick color study, and you can see it here in front of us, where we've got the green, olivey green kind of for the background. We've got some shades of purple, a little bit of red, some orange and yellow to kind of highlight certain sections of the sign. In reality, I went through and did this new design because if you remember in some of the other previous streams that we did, I had mocked up something that was a little bit different. And my initial design was something more like this, where it was much more squared off. I still had kind of these angles here on the side that the doors were going to sit on. I had the sign up top. We kind of start on here and kind of pan down. Had the Boxers and Briefs sign. But I think this turned out okay. But after going through and looking at it a little bit more, I didn't necessarily like how the signs were kind of stacked up on top of the building. And if I was to go through and highlight those, I had to use a technique like I'm showing here. That I had to put this kind of highlight around them, literally highlight them, to make sure they stood out. The color enough didn't seem quite to be doing what I wanted. I thought it flattened out quite a bit on the sides. And again, I don't think it's necessarily terrible. It just feels a bit boring and a bit stiff. I did like how certain elements like this sign came out when I was using little bits of hatching and whatnot inside of there. So the impetus for the latest version that I'm trying here, that the color key matches up to, is to try to get away from having these big chunky sides. And again, it goes back to that minimalist approach that we're trying to take here. So what I am going to do is, since I do like kind of how some of this stuff started off here, I'm going to strip out some of these sign bits, specifically from the drawing that I did, or the kind of the line work that I did on this one, and I'm going to pull those into my new version. While I'm also going to go through and looking at this, I'm going to start to make color samples for myself. And the way I tend to like to work is to take samples from this then and pull it into Photoshop so I can keep going back to those. And if you look here, you can see those off to the side. So I've got my swatches over here that represent the purple. This is the green for the background, the sky, the red for the sign, the doors, the white for the sign. This is the underside of the trim here, the kind of the roof line. And then this is kind of the interior green. That's not quite as dark as what's under the roof, and it's a little bit darker here to make this pop. So getting all those set up, I can sample those really nice and easy. I also kind of put the color key off to the side up here just so I can kind of see it a little bit easier. And one thing I thought I would share here is, again, just a little tiny trick that I like to use, which is basically to go in, and I have this really high-res scan that I got from textures.com. I bought it from them. And what I ended up doing here is pulling that into my scene, and you can see I have it layered up, and as I go through, and this video is going to be in a time-lapse fashion, but you're going to see me take this and colorize it and use it as a bit of the noise, and you can see the difference that it makes right off the bat in the video, and start painting directly on top of that. So one other thing I wanted to point out is that I've gone through and I've adjusted the rough here. What I want to do is have this brick wall kind of come out this way and then up and then over, and I'm just going to hint at all the trees and stuff back here with some green lines and whatnot. So I've kind of cleaned up my rough just a little bit. And again, like I mentioned, I pulled in some of the elements from my other drawing that I've already done that kind of serve now as the key, the kind of the overall sketchiness that I want. And I'm going to go ahead and correct things like this text and sketch it up just a little bit and not just use a straight font. So anyways, that's a little bit of the setup work that I've already gone ahead and done. Again, referencing a previous version that I already did. And I do have a video that I may post in terms of me painting this version right here, and kind of going through some of the trials. And this really was a trial. To kind of see what the style was like and how much detail to put on things. And again, I just decided I wanted to try something different with this new layout that I think it fits the show maybe a little bit better. So anyways, with that out of the way, we're going to jump in and we're going to start painting. Alright, so we're going to start off with doing the outlines and the line work on the main building. So what I'm first doing here is grabbing a texture that I'm going to apply, which is basically a piece of paper, and I'm applying it as a layer here. I color corrected it to be the same color as the background, then use it as a lighten blend mode, which pulls some of the detail out of there and just kind of breaks up that solid green. Now I'm going to go ahead and just mask out the kind of the sky area that's going to sit directly behind. And one of the reasons for this is because now I can have that blue back behind the signs that say Boxers and Briefs. That'll help pull them away from the building and kind of separate them just a little bit, almost acting as a highlight later on once I finish painting this. I'm going to mask out the brick wall. Again, kind of working non-destructive here, so I'm going to put on a separate layer. And now I'm going to mask out just a really crude version of the building itself. And I'll go in after the fact and kind of clean it up a little bit with a brush, using the tilde key to go ahead and use it as the eraser with the brush. So now I'm going to clean that up. I like this dry brush a lot for this look. It kind of gives a nice little broken line. Again, just trying to move over this pretty quickly. This has obviously been sped up. And yes, I can't spell, so I'll be fixing the etc. later. Okay, so I pulled these signs in from the other background that I had done as a test because I liked the way they looked in terms of the line qualities and whatnot. And because they were already finished, kind of saved me a few steps here. So I just grabbed those out of another Photoshop file, pulled them in here. What I'm doing is skewing the sign at the top just a little bit more. It was a little bit too straight. I want everything to be a little bit wobbly to kind of fit the show. And testing out my line thickness here, trying to make sure that whatever I draw out is going to match in terms of how close I can get to it. I don't want it to be too fat if I get too close up on it. So you almost need to know where you're going to be shooting this from in terms of distance to camera or distance to background. Kind of going to be stepping forward here quite a bit because it's kind of boring to sit and watch someone line out this entire thing. So again, just kind of masking things out. As I don't like them, I kind of rip them out, maybe try something different. Looking for lines, looking for different spaces behind objects like the sign to make sure it doesn't feel too consistent or too symmetrical. Getting rid of some of those lines. The actual ink brush that I'm using is a Brayer 3 ink brush from the Kyle Mega Pack, which I like a lot for this look. I went through a lot of different brushes before deciding on this as the main brush. So now we're coming down to the bottom. We've kind of roughed in the doors, adding some little details. Now it starts to become a matter of where do I want those details and where do things need to kind of die off because they start to compete at some point, and you can see that a little bit in some of these sections. So again, jumping forward, now I'm kind of putting some shingles and just some really loose line work on top. Some of this stuff I may go back and tweak later on, some of it may stay. I tend to always go back and I try to go through and do things fairly quickly for this look, and then I'll go back in later on and tighten up certain aspects. Alright, so after a bit of time I've kind of jumped ahead again, and this is the finished line work that I'm going to be using for the building itself. So if I get in close to it, again, when you're working on things like this, you want to make sure that your lines aren't going to be too thick if you're going to be right up on top of it. But in the case of this particular background, we're not going to get any closer than this, so I thought some of the thickness here felt pretty good. You can see I'm using some contrast in terms of really thin lines versus thicker lines, using thicker lines around some sections that are farther forward. I also am cheating perspective in this, where I'm making it feel like this front window piece here is jutting out further than maybe the rest of this, so it kind of sticks forward in space. Also, kind of using this style is nice because while you want to be able to draw in perspective and draw it accurately, I'm kind of using a cheat here where I'm not showing the thickness on the corner because I like the way it looked better. Here I am kind of drawing in some of that thickness on the underside, but again, this particular style allows for a lot of creative freedom and flexibility in terms of how you delineate your lines and show form with lines. So the overall perspective feels correct, but there's a lot of cool little cheats and things that are happening inside of it. I've gone ahead and added this grand opening stuff, the text kind of right here, and I've also got the flags and whatnot, which I can turn on here. So I've kind of broken things up into layers. You can see right now it's hard to see because they're on top of each other, but if I was to go through and kind of turn off some of the outlines, you can see more clearly what some of the signs look like, and then some of the stuff stacked on top. Now, one of the things I do want to show that I think is kind of fun relative to the style is all the little details we can inlay on top of this. You can see here I'm choosing not to put some of these little filigree bits simply because it starts to become too much and it starts to compete with each other, so I'm keeping them only to the outsides here. But what I want to do now is go through and add some more detail. I like the way these signs read. They're kind of sketched out. Again, if we go back to the inspector reference, you'll see lots of little sketch lines inside of things. They hint at texture with like wood and crosshatch. So I went through and added some secondary outlines, and you can see them here. And what these are doing is kind of filling in, and I took some of the stuff that you saw up here on the top and ripped it onto the secondary layer, but it's giving just a little bit of texture in terms of line to some of these spots. So it looks like a little bit of wood. It's kind of roughing it up just a little bit, kind of aging it as well. Down here I've added these cobblestones in, which will look really nice when I go ahead and I paint up and just add just a little bit of color inside of there. One of the things that I'd like to show you really quickly, again, I don't want to make this a full-on tutorial, but I can show you how I accomplish some of these things. Again, This is not amazingly, groundbreaking stuff here, but if I was to go through and draw some shapes like so, in a lot of cases what I'll do is draw like this for paving stones and for whatnot, and I'm just going to get whatever shapes. I'm just drawing arbitrary random shapes right now. And I almost create like a little palette for or a little kind of template for myself in terms of texture. So I could take this then, and if I hit Control T and use the translate, hold down Alt, what you can start to do is bend these things around to get them into a perspective. So sometimes when I'm having problems with something, or if I think it just might be easier, I'll create almost a swatch of things and then bend them into whatever perspective that I want. Again, just a really quick little hack. It's a nice little tool to have to do things like this down here, where that's essentially how I got all these little cobblestones. I created a swatch, and then I went through and duplicated it, and I skewed it all. And it's not to say I'm not going to go in and tweak some of this stuff some more. But let's get back to the lines here for a second, because there is a little bit more that I added. Where's my mouse? There it is. So I also have these wood shingles that I've added. And if I click these on, so now I've got these lines that are kind of cutting across. And again, all of these little layers start to add up and start to make it feel very kind of sketchy. And if I take this away and you go back to the original outline, you can see how plain this feels. So adding these little details in, now I've got those. And then I did one more pass, and this is the detail pass for these wood shingles. And that adds just a little bit more to it. So a lot of this is going to get knocked back when I start to rough out the color. So I'm not afraid of having too much of it right now, but I will have it on separate layers so I can simply dial it up. Or if there's some areas that I wanted it and others I don't later on after everything's color blocked and I start adding some grit to it, it's really easy then to go through and kind of take off what I don't want. So anyways, I've got all of this now bundled up underneath this outline. I've got a couple extra layers in there I didn't end up using. If I pull back out, and this is what we're going to be looking at. So again, all this stuff will start to read really well once we start to block in the rest of the color, and that's going to be the next step. But for part one of this background, we're going to go ahead and stop this video here. If you're interested, again, go ahead and subscribe to the channel if you want to see more, and then we're going to start doing the color blocking and final painting in the next video.